Thanks for coming, guys. So, I'll introduce myself to start with. My name's McNeice. I'm a technical consultant at Kainos. I work a lot with skills at the minute and have done for the last couple of years with our app camp and our code camp. But I've brought along Tom today to talk to you guys, hopefully about some of his experience of developing Airpi. So, Tom, 18, just sitting his A-levels at the minute at Westminster, and he's developer of the Airpi. Tom, maybe you can explain maybe what Airpi is.
Okay, so basically the Airpi is a shield for the Raspberry Pi. And the Raspberry Pi is a tiny little computer about the size of a credit card, this size, and it only costs 20 quid. So when we created it, we wanted to make sure that we used all of the capabilities of the Raspberry Pi properly. So the Raspberry Pi is small, and it's low power, which means that it can be battery powered or solar powered to sort of help the environment. And also it's cheap. So we wanted to create something that was cheap and could be easily used. So we decided to go with a weather station, which is effectively multiple sensors measuring temperature, humidity, air pressure, and air quality simultaneously, and uploading it to the internet in real time. So I'll show you, actually. It might make things easier.
Okay.
So this is the Airpi. I've already set it up and it's uploading, as you might be able to see by the blinking green light there. So it's pretty small, and it's also relatively cheap. The whole thing can be bought for under sort of £70 or so. And it uploads via Wi-Fi to the internet. So here we see how the temperature's been in the room for the last sort of couple of 5 minutes or so. And you can see it's been relatively constant. However, if I take my hairdryer, and just blast it for a couple of seconds, you can see that the temperature has immediately jumped to sort of 45 degrees or so. So that's basically what the Airpi is. Obviously, it measures other things like poisonous gases like nitrogen dioxide and carbon monoxide, but I can't really sort of test those in here without murdering all of you, so I'll do my best.
Thanks, Tom. So Tom, where did the idea come from?
So the idea was basically, it was in response to a competition which we saw online. So the prize was like £1,000, and I was like, may as well enter. I mean, even if we lose, we still created something cool. So me and a friend, we sort of went online and we were like, what can we do with the Raspberry Pi? Because the competition basically forced you to use a Raspberry Pi. So we looked at different things, and the simplest but yet most sort of extensible idea, so the thing that we could make the most out of possible, was a weather station, because we could just keep adding sensors over time.
Okay, and I guess with you being here today, it's alluding to that you're taking it beyond the competition. So when did you decide to take it beyond the competition?
So after the competition, we got quite a lot of news coverage. We had an article in the BBC and like an article in Wired and all of that kind of stuff. And I was just like, whoa, we just created this competition. Didn't expect anyone to actually be interested in it. So we had quite a few people email us through the sort of contact form on the website saying that they wanted to buy one. So eventually, it's sort of like middle of summer holidays last year, I was just like, okay, whatever, I'll make some. So I went on a crowdfunding site similar to Kickstarter, sort of like set the goal at like 50 units, and was just like, let's see if people actually want it. So after a couple of weeks, we hit about 50 units, and then we got featured on the Raspberry Pi blog, which is viewed by sort of like 500,000 people each day, and they're all interested in Raspberry Pis, surprisingly enough. So we got about 100 pre-orders in a day, and then by the end of the sort of like 3 or 4 weeks that we'd set it to, we'd hit like 300 orders, and we hadn't expected that at all.
Very good. So crowdfunding, you kind of alluded that it was a bit stressful. I know that I've done a few Kickstarters myself, and especially hardware ones, there's always delays. Have you had any setbacks yourself?
So yeah, we actually had an awful lot of issues with the Kickstarter, because mostly due to the fact that we'd expected we were going to be making about 50, but in reality we're making like 300. So the issue started with us not actually being able to get the money from the crowdfunding site. So they used PayPal, and PayPal, if you're importing money into the UK over like £5,000 or so, then they basically need more information off you to make sure that you're not money laundering. And that information includes your date of birth, yet PayPal also states that you have to be over 18 to use the site, and I was 17 at the time. So I gave them all of my information, including my date of birth, and they basically shut down the account and basically taking all our money with it. So I managed to get it refunded, and eventually the way that I got the money was just by waiting until I was 18. So I wouldn't recommend using PayPal for anything.
Was there any other challenges that you maybe had, when you started developing? I mean, I guess you said that you wanted 50, and you got 300. I mean, I guess going from 50 to 300 at face value doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're building these things by hand, I guess problems can arise with economy of scale.
Yeah, so especially with importing components, so any imports under the value of £2,000 can just be sent straight into the UK. However, over that you need sort of like all sorts of weird and wacky information from HMRC, and that particular stuff to get was a massive pain, mostly because we hadn't set up our company at that point in time. So we were sort of like struggling with doing all sorts of like sort of 3 different things at once, and each of them relied on the other one. It was kind of like a circle. So that ended up meaning that half of our components were stuck in customs for a month and a half.
You said our company. Did you do this all by yourself?
It was me and a friend initially, but she was less interested in the business side, so she still gets a cut of the profits, but she's not actually developing the product anymore.
Okay, very good. So how many, you mentioned you shipped 300 to date. What's your growth plans, or what's the expectations for this year?
So right now we have 1,000 people on our waiting list, which is pretty scary, and we're just about to finish off making 700 more kits. They're all being made in my bedroom. It's just sort of like I call up my friends, and it's like, hey, do you want to come and like put components in bags for a couple of days? I'll pay you lots of money. And they're like, sure. So so I bring them over, and we put them together. So we have 700 sitting in my bedroom right now, ready to be sent out.
How long does it take to build one, to assemble one?
To assemble one would be about 5 to 10 minutes, I would say.
Okay, okay. So you mentioned that the original idea was that was going to be for the weather station. Is there any other ideas that maybe some of the people that have got one already, that, what other things are people doing with it?
So yeah, most people are just using it as kind of like a weather station, but we've had people do all sorts of weird things. Like one guy used it to check if the light inside his fridge actually turned off when he closed the door, for example. And another person is using it to monitor the temperature in his greenhouse and the conditions in there. We also sold 15 to a soldering club in Germany who wanted to teach 15 children how to solder. So education is quite a big aspect. And then also we had one guy who emailed me from Ireland, and he was like, we want to make your Airpi waterproof and shockproof and send it up a tornado in Tornado Alley in USA. And I was like, okay.
Very good. When we were chatting about this before, you had mentioned, I think, something about a fleet of vans.
Yeah, so also there were some guys from Mumbai in India who run temperature-controlled vans for sort of transporting cold products like food. And they wanted to buy like 100 Airpis to put them in their temperature-controlled vans in India. And I kind of backed out of that immediately and just said, we can't do that, because I could just imagine all of the pain that would happen when they like tried to install them and failed. And then it was like, I'm in the UK and they're in India, and they're just like complaining at me, and there's nothing I can do.
Well, it's very mature to think about support, I guess, at this early stage of your business. So, I mean, has it all been worth it? I mean, it sounds like you've had a lot of learnings, you've had a lot of challenges, but would you do it again?
Yes, but there's stuff I would change.
Sure, sure. So I guess so. I was wondering if anyone else had questions for Tom. tough crowd. So if there's anyone in the crowd that wants to follow your footsteps, you know, or maybe thinking about an idea that they can do, whether it's an app or maybe it's something to add to the Raspberry Pi, like you'd done yourself, I mean, is there any piece of advice that you could maybe give them, or what's the best piece of advice you could give them?
I would say don't be afraid to fail, because failure is inevitable in a way. So I've made sort of like at least 10 different apps before this, and none of them have sort of been remotely interested, haven't got more than sort of like 50 downloads or something, and most of them were free anyway. So don't be afraid to fail, but if you see that people are interested, if you see that there's that just spark of interest, when you tell someone about it, they're like, ooh, that's quite cool, then latch onto it, take it, and just let it sort of grow, but go slowly.
Okay. So what about growth plans? I mean, what's next?
So next, hopefully, we're trying to sort of make this more consumer friendly. So right now, it's a massive pain to set up. You have to sort of like install code manually onto the Raspberry Pi, and then you have to solder the kit together yourself. And if it crashes, that's another issue as well. So we want to make something that can be just used by anyone. They'll just be able to buy it off the shelf in Tesco's or Waitrose or whatever, put it in their garden, turn it on, and it'll send data straight to their mobile phone.
Okay. So thank you very much, Tom. It's been really informative, and hopefully you've motivated some people today, and we'll see some of the next generation of entrepreneurs sitting right here. So thanks, guys. Everybody give Tom a round of applause.